Yeah, I know what I'm doing. Since when an amendment has I know what I'm doing. Since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper, the next speaker is Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, you will not be surprised to know that it's my intention to vote against the second reading of this bill if a vote is called, and I shall be supporting the reasoned amendment which I think is going to be moved very shortly by the Scottish Nationalists. And because of the rather measured position which the Right Honourable and learned gentleman had to present on behalf of the official Labour Party, it falls to me to be the first member of this House to set out the case why I believe, and I hope I went with the last speaker, why I believe that it's in the national interest for the United Kingdom to be a member of the European Union, why I believe we have benefited from that position for the last 45 years, and most importantly, why I believe future generations will benefit if we actually succeed in remaining a member of the European Union. It's a case that hardly received any national publicity during the extraordinary referendum campaign, but it does actually go to the heart of the historic decision that the House is being asked to make now. It so happens that my political career entirely coincides with British involvement with the European Union. I started over 50 years ago supporting Harold Macmillan's application to join. I helped get the majority cross-party vote for the European Communities Act before we did join in 1973, and it looks like my last Parliament is going to be the Parliament which we leave. But I do not look back with any regret. We made very wise decisions. I believe that membership of the European Union was the way in which we got out of the appalling state we were in when, after Suez, we had discovered that we had no role in the world we were clear about once we'd lost our empire, and that our economy was becoming a laughingstock because we were falling behind the countries on the continent that had been devastated in the war but appeared to have a better way of proceeding than we did. And I believe that our membership of the European Union restored to us our national self-confidence, gave us politically a role in the world as a leading member of the Union, which made us more valuable to our allies, like the United States, and made our rivals, like the Russians, to take us more seriously because of our role of leadership in the European Union. And it helped to reinforce our own values as well. And our economy benefited enormously and continued to benefit even more as the market developed from our close and successful involvement in developing trading relationships with the inhabitants of the continent. Now, I'm very fortunate to be called this early. I apologise to my old friend and right honourable friend, but there are 93 other members still waiting to be called, so if you forgive me, I won't. In fact, the Conservative governments in which I served made very positive contributions to the development of the European Union. There were two areas in which we were the leading contender and made a big difference. The first was when the Thatcher government led the way in the creation of the single market. The customs union, the so-called common market, had served its purpose, but regulatory barriers matter more than tariffs in the modern world. And but for the Thatcher government, the others would not have been induced to remove those barriers, and I think the British benefited more from the single market than any other member state. It has contributed to our comparative economic success today. We were also always the leading government after the fall of the Soviet Union in the process of enlargement to Eastern Europe, taking in the former Soviet states, and that was an extremely important political contribution. After the surprising collapse of the Soviet Union, Eastern and Central Europe could have collapsed into its traditional anarchy, nationalist rivals, military regimes which had preceded the Second World War. We actually pressed the urgency of bringing in these new independent nations, giving them the goal of European Union, which meant liberal democracy, free market trade, and so on, and we made Europe a much more stable place. So that has been our role in the European Union, and I do believe that it is a very, very bad move, particularly for our children and grandchildren, that we're all sitting here now saying that we're embarking on a new unknown future, which I shall touch on a moment, but which I think is simply baffling every friend of the British and the United Kingdom throughout the world. So that is why I shall vote against. Let me just deal with the arguments that I should not vote, that I'm being undemocratic, that this is quite wrong, and as an elected Member of Parliament, I'm under a duty to vote contrary to the views I have just given. And I'm told this is because we held a referendum. Now, firstly, I'm in the happy situation that my opposition to referendums as an instrument of government is quite well known and has been frequently repeated throughout my political career, and I made no commitment to accept a referendum. I think particularly this referendum, with such an enormous question being asked for a simple yes-no answer on one day, with hundreds of complex issues wrapped up within it, was a most unsuitable, particularly unsuitable question for a plebiscite of that kind, and that was reinforced by the nature of the debate. Constitutionally, when the government tried to stop the House having a vote, they didn't go to the Supreme Court arguing that a referendum bound the House, and that was why we shouldn't have a vote, because the referendum had always been described as advisory in everything that the government put out. There's no constitutional standing for referendums in this country. No sensible country has referendums. The United States, Germany don't have referendums in their political system. They went to the Supreme Court arguing the archaic constitutional principle of the royal prerogative, that the executive somehow had absolute power when it came to dealing with treaties, and not surprisingly, they lost. But what about the position of those members of Parliament here? Because there's no doubt that by an adequate but narrow majority, Leave won the referendum campaign. I won't comment on the nature of the campaign. Those arguments which got publicity in the national media on both sides, were on the whole fairly pathetic. I've agreed in conversation with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Brexit, that he and I can both tell ourselves that neither of us used the dafter arguments being used by the people we were allied with. But there was not a very serious debate on the subject. I don't recall £350 million a week for the health service coming from the Secretary of State for Brexit. And I didn't say we were going to have a budget to put up income tax and all this kind of thing. It's all quite pathetic. But going back to what is the position, let me give an analogy, a loose one, but I think not totally loose, explaining the position of members of Parliament after this referendum. I have fought... Lord knows how many elections we've fought over the last 50 years, and I have always advocated voting Conservative. But the British public, in their wisdom, have occasionally failed to take my advice, and they have actually, by a majority, voted Labour. And I have found myself here facing a Labour government. I do not recall an occasion when I've been told it was now my democratic duty to support Labour policies and the Labour governments on the other side of the House. And I think that proposition put to the honourable member for Bolsover when he's been in opposition, or to myself, would have been treated with ridicule and scorn. Now, I apparently am now being told that despite having... voted as I did in the referendum, somehow I am an enemy of the people, ignoring my instructions to stick to the opinions that I was expressing, at least in my meetings, rather strongly, urging them to vote the other way. And I have no intention of changing my opinion on the ground. Indeed, I personally am convinced that the hardcore Eurosceptics in my party, with whom I've enjoyed debating this for decades now, would not have felt bound in the slightest by the outcome of the referendum to abandon their arguments. Well, I don't say that as criticism. I actually am on good terms with the hardline Eurosceptics because I respect their sincerity and the passionate nature of their beliefs. But if I ever live to see the honourable member for Stone turn up here and vote in favour of Britain remaining in the European Union, well, I retract what I say, but a referendum, hot tongs would not make the honourable member for Stone vote for membership of the European Union. Finally, I must move on, but I'm told, Mr. Speaker, that of course I should vote with my party. It is a three-line whip, and I am a Conservative, decently loyal Conservative over the years. The last time I kicked over the traces was on the Lisbon Treaty, where my party suddenly, for some peculiar reason, got itself on the wrong side of the argument. But I'll pass that over. But what I would point out to those who say that somehow I am being disloyal to my party by not voting in favour of this bill, I am merely propounding the official policy of the Conservative Party for 50 years until the 23rd of June 2015. I admire my colleagues who can suddenly become enthusiastic Brexiteers, having seen a light on the road to Damascus on the day that the vote was cast on the 23rd of June. I'm afraid that light has been denied me. I feel the spirit of the former colleague, who I rather respected, apart from one or two of his extreme views, my former colleague Enoch Powell, the best speaker of the Eurosceptic cause I probably ever heard in this House of Commons. If he was here, he probably would find it amazing to believe that his party had become Eurosceptic and rather mildly anti-immigrant in a very strange way in 2016. Well, I'm afraid on that I haven't followed them, and I don't intend to do so. There are very serious issues which weren't addressed in the referendum. They've been touched on. They're the customs union. And that must be properly debated. It is absurd to say that every elector actually knew what the difference was between the customs union and the single market and had taken a careful and studied view on the basis of our future trade relations with Europe. The fact is, I admire the Prime Minister and her colleagues for their constant propounding of the principles of free trade. My party hasn't changed that. We are believers that free trade is a win-win situation. We were the leading advocates of liberal economic policies amongst the European powers, have done for many years, so we're free traders. So that it seems to me it is unarguable that if you put between us and the biggest free market in the world new tariffs, new regulatory barriers, new customs procedures, certificates of origin and so on, you are bound to be weakening your economic position that it would otherwise have been, other things being equal, in future. That's why it's important that that issue is particularly addressed. Now, what I'm told is that's pessimistic. We're combining withdrawal from the single market and the customs union with this great new globalised future which offers tremendous opportunities for us. Apparently you follow the rabbit down the hole and you emerge in a wonderland where suddenly countries throughout the world are queuing up to give us trading advantages and access to their markets that previously we've never been able to achieve as part of the European Union. Nice men like President Trump, President Erdogan, are just impatient to abandon their normal protectionism and give us access. Don't let me be too cynical. I hope that's right. I do want the best outcome for the United Kingdom from this process. No doubt somewhere there's a hatter holding a tea party with a dormouse in the teapot. We need success in these trade negotiations to recoup at least some of the losses which we're going to incur from leaving the single market. And if all is lost on the main principle, that is the big principle this House must get control of and address seriously in proper debates and votes from now on. So I end, I hope I've adequately explained that my views have not been shaken very much on this issue over the decades and have actually somewhat strengthened. Most people here are familiar with Burke's address to the electors of Bristol, I trust, and I always firmly believe that every MP should vote on an issue of this importance according to their view of the best national interest. I never quote Burke, but I paraphrase him. And he said to his constituents, if I no longer don't give you my benefit of my judgment and simply follow your orders, I am not serving you, I am betraying you. I personally shall be voting with my conscience content in this vote, and when we see what unfolds hereafter as we leave the European Union, I hope the consciences of other members of Parliament remain equally content.